In this video, we will be talking about the operation which is called division. Division is the action of taking a pile and splitting up that pile into equally sized smaller groups. For example, if someone says divide 8 by 2, divide 8 by 2, what they're asking me to do is to start with a pile of 8 objects. And now that I have that pile of 8 objects, what I'm going to do is I'm going to evenly divide these 8 objects into 2 piles of equal size. Then each pile will contain 4 objects within it. And so dividing 8 by 2, dividing 8 into 2 groups of equal size, those groups ended up being 4 objects large. And so the result of this division would be 4. Now there are a couple of different ways to perform division. And one of the ways to perform division is to do this kind of situation that we did up here. So for example, if somebody said to me, divide 12 by 3, 12 objects, and then I would distribute those 12 objects into 3 piles of equal size. So for example, I would put this first object into the first pile, this object into the second pile, this object into the third, and then I would move this into the first pile, then the second pile, then the third pile, first, second, third, first, second, third. And so then, what is the size of the piles that I've created? Each pile contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 objects. So the size of each of those piles would be the result of this division, result 4. Another way to think about division is what I learned growing up was called the Gazinta method. Gazinta is meant to stand for goes into. So, for example, if someone says divide 12 by 3, they're asking how many times does 3 go into 12? So to answer that question, I would say, okay, if I have 12 objects, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, how many times does 3 go into this pile? 3 goes into this pile once here. 3 has gone in once with these 3 objects. 3 goes in a second time here. 3 goes in a second time. 3 goes in here, and 3 goes in here. 3 can go into 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 times. So that's another way to get this same result of 4. If I think about dividing 12 by 3, how many times does 3 go into 12? 3 goes into 12 4 times. It's also possible to divide using a calculator. And if I wanted to divide 12 by 3 on a calculator, I would type in the number 12, and then I would hit this symbol right here. 12 bar with 2 dots divided by 3 equal sign. And so from the calculator, I get a result of 4 as well. On the calculator, we see one of the main symbols used for division. One of the main symbols used for division is this div sign. The horizontal bar with 2 dots. So I could write, for example, 12 divided by 3. 12 divided by 3. Another way to symbolically represent division is by using a horizontal bar and putting the numbers in the position of these dots above and below the bar. So, for example, I could also write 12 at the top and then a bar and then underneath that 3. And this would also communicate 12 divided by 3, a pile of 12 that's been divided into 3 equally sized smaller piles. Now, one final notation that you might see used, especially if you're looking at typed math, is just a slash. So, for example, if I write 12/3, that is also a way to communicate divide 12 by 3. So, for example, if I say 20 div sign 4, then I'm saying if I had 20 objects and I divided them into 4 piles, then how many objects would be in each of those piles? Or I could also say, how many times does 4 go into 20? Or I could also calculate it on the calculator. 20 division sign 4 gives me a result of 5 units. Suppose that I had 18 divided by 6. I have a pile of 18 objects and I want to split them into 6 groups. How many times does 6 go into 18? In other words, I could do this on the calculator as 18 divided by 6. And the result of that is 3. Or I could say, what is 10 divided by 2? If I had a pile of 10 objects, how many objects would be left if I split that into 2 equally sized groups? If I split 10 objects into 2 groups, then each one of those groups will contain 5 objects within it. So the result of that would be 5. Now let's talk about some of the common words that are used to communicate division. The main word that's used to indicate division is quotient. So for example, if someone said, what is the quotient of 40 and 4? What they're asking you is, what is 40 divided by 4? What happens if you take a collection of 40 objects and you divide it into 4 piles? In that case, I have 40 divided by 4, giving me 10 objects left in each pile. Or I could say simply, what is 9 divided by 3? 9 divided by 3. I could say if I have a pile of 9 objects, how many times does 3 go into 9? 1, 2, 3. 3 goes into 9 3 times, so 9 divided by 3 is 3 again. One of the ways that division is used in the real world is when you are trying to share something fairly. For example, if I have 32 pieces of candy and I want to share them equally between 4 people, how many pieces of candy will each person get? This question can be answered by taking the total number of candy pieces that I have and dividing that among the 4 people. And so if I take 32 objects and divide it by 4, each person, each group is going to get 8 of those objects. 8 candy pieces per person. Or suppose that I have 10 cups of flour in my cupboard and I want to make some cakes, and my cake recipe requires 2 cups of flour per cake. How many cakes can I make from all this flour? Well, if I have 10 cups of flour, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and every single cake requires 2 cups, then 2 cups will go to cake number 1 here, 2 cups will go to cake number 2 here, 2 cups, 2 cups, and 2 cups. So in total, I have 10 divided by 2, giving me a result of 5. 5 cakes can be made from the 10 cups of flour. For example, what happens if you divide a number by itself? For example, if I had 3 divided by 3, then I would be taking a pile of 3 objects and I would be making 3 groups. Now, if I take a pile of 3 objects and make 3 groups, then every single pile ends up with only 1 object in it. And this happens every single time. If you would divide a number by itself, the result of that is always going to be equal to 1. So, for example, if someone says, what's 1215 divided by 1215, you can answer this question immediately. If you divide a number by itself, the result of that is always going to be 1 unit. Okay, so we've seen that dividing a number by itself results in 1. But what if you divide a number by 1? For example, what if I had something like 5 divided by 1? Well, if I have 5 objects in a pile, and I just want to keep it in a single pile, then I have not changed anything. I already have one pile. So dividing it into just one pile, nothing changes. So the result of that is still going to be 5. And this happens every single time. If you divide a number by 1, the number doesn't change. It was already in one pile, and you've just kept it in one pile, so nothing changes. So, for example, if someone says to you, I have got 74,329 objects in a single pile, and I want to keep it in just one pile, then you know right away the result is going to be exactly the same number that you started with. It's still going to be 74,329. Now, another special case. What happens if I have 0 divided by some number? For example, suppose that I have 0 divided by 3. So I have literally no objects at all. And if I want to share no objects fairly in 3 groups, then no one is getting anything at all, right? I didn't have anything to start with. So dividing no objects fairly, everybody gets 0. Result 0. And this happens every single time. If I have no objects to start with, and I divide that 0 into some number of groups, the result of that is going to be 0 every single time. So, for example, if someone says, what's 0 divided by 51,293? You don't even have to think about it. I didn't have any objects to start with. So if I divide 0 objects fairly among 51,000 people, everyone's getting nothing. Now, it's different if you divide by 0. It's different if you take, for example, 3 and divide it by 0. So the opposite of what we had before. Not 0 divided by 3, but 3 divided by 0. What this is trying to say, divide 3 objects into no groups at all? Or put another way, how many times does 0 go into 3? Well, neither of these questions really make any sense. If you have 3 objects, but you're not dividing them into any groups, it doesn't make sense to talk about how many objects end up in each group. And if you're trying to talk about how many times does 0 go into 3, that doesn't make any sense either, because 0 can go into 3 as many times as you want. 0 is not taking up any space inside of 3. If you try and put this into a calculator, 3 divided by 0, you're going to get an error message. Cannot divide by 0. And this is actually the correct answer. It is not possible to divide by 0. It doesn't make any sense to do that. So I have heard this particular phrase used to help students remember between 0 divided by 3 and 3 divided by 0. The phrase that I've heard is okay. It's okay to have 0 divided by some other number, but no, n over o, no, you cannot have some number divided by 0. This is okay to have 0 divided, but it's not okay to divide another number by 0.